This is your spotlight. We want to thank you. We want to thank you for creating safe spaces for our children. We want to thank you for closing your eyes and taking that deep breath before you have to walk in the door and defend one of our babies. We want to thank you for showing our children that there is a pathway for them, that they can impact people like you all do today.
Have you guys ever had any black educators, and if so, can you tell us about them?
First black educator was my science teacher, Mr. Holiday, and I still talk to him to this day. He's just a big part of my school life.
The first black educator for me would have to be Mrs. Tima, even though she's not an educator. Since I was always in advanced classes, I never had very colored or many colored people in my classrooms. So having Mrs. Tima be there for me, as a second mom, really made me more comfortable in the environment I was in.
Representation, I feel like it matters a lot, especially when you're young and in the education system. I feel like it's important to see yourself in places of power where you can feel like that you can be in that place as well. And as I said, black teachers and brown teachers, they can understand you on a deeper level than white teachers can, and I feel like they can support you in a better way because they know kind of your background and kind of the same circumstances that white people and white teachers won't understand.
Representation matters, and it's important to see people that look like you so they can understand where you're coming from, know where you're going, know your struggle.
I feel like black educators are important because they not only show us that we can do it, but they encourage us to.
Visibility is important. So you never could if I never had a black educator, and I grew up in South Florida, you see a lot of stuff that's going on right now in the state of Florida. So you don't have educators in these places. I don't know how that would look for me. Can I relate to different students?
Black and brown educators, they see us as human beings. Sometimes when just calling a spade, white educators, they see us as something unhuman. So having more black and brown educators in the midst, it just it humanizes who you are.
Black educators are important because they understand you more than white educator would. They understand the things that you deal with on a constant basis because they live through it.
It's very important for black and brown students to be able to see themselves in their teaching, and for educators to provide a safe space for all of us to come together as a community and really share our thoughts and opinions about just everyday things.
We need, to reflect our student population, which is made up of black and brown students. We need people that can relate to each other and with each other. We can create safe spaces. It's a crisis. We need educators of color.
I think our presence alone makes a difference, right? And we connect with our students on a different level. And so if I'm connecting with students who may be struggling in any aspect, and I can take the time to get them back on track and support them, we're all winning.
They just give us a sense of belonging. They know how to connect to us on a deeper level, just because they're the same color as us, and we don't usually see a lot of people like that. And just a sense of something different.
Because seeing someone that looks just like you, it helps a lot when there's to succeed, because if you're in an environment where people that don't look like you, you feel like you're out of place. So just having black educators that look like you give you a sense of belonging sometimes.
So tonight we're here to celebrate the BIPOC, the Black, Indigenous, and all people of color who spend their time investing in our babies. So if you are one of those, tonight we are celebrating you. This conversation is for you.
First of all, I want to take this time out to just thank everybody for coming. I know it's Monday night. It's going on 7 o'clock. Weeknight, everybody came from work. So once again, I appreciate this showcase why BIPOC educators is so important, because you guys took the time out today to just come out here and celebrate. So once again, I appreciate that.
It is so wonderful to be here. I got to be in the front greeting everybody with the t-shirts and all that, and I was just like, oh, it feels so amazing to be among friends. So many friends that I haven't seen in a long time. This feels like community, and it feels like our community, and I'm just, it's such an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Take it lightly that I get to be a part of this work. So I'm grateful to be part of this movement. We do think about MER more as a movement than just a program, and everyone who's here is part of that because you're here. Students in particular, rising educators in particular, elders in particular. So we're honored that you're here and part of this movement with us.
My name is Tay Spears Hardy, and I am the DEI Director for David Douglas School District. And when I think of the See It, Be It, I have a personal story that I believe in all the trials and tribulations and what we were told we couldn't do. And so at the age of 12, my mom was on a bus from Arkansas and traveled by herself. At the age of 12 from Arkansas to Portland, Oregon, and along the way was told several times that she would not be served food, water, any of those things, and she pushed until she got the yes. And so when I think of the See It, Be It, I push until I get the yes. And so I contribute that to my mother and things that I wouldn't have been able to see without the support of her and who she has provided me to be to this day.
My name is Ian Twist. I come from the Burnt Thigh people of Rosebud, South Dakota, and I'm a Dean of Students over at McDaniel High School. I've been there for 7 years. Anybody ever heard of Gathering of Nations powwow? So I was just there on Saturday. There's like 10,000 Native people in this Coliseum and 13 white folks. It was rad. And so I go to these places, right, and I see what indigeneity is. I see what it means to learn in a Native way. I see what it means to express who we are as Indigenous people in the ways that we were made, you know, and then I come back to Portland and then it's sort of gone. Right? And so when I think of See It, Be It, I want to bring those back into our educational places so that our Native students can show up fully as Native people in the ways that they think, in the ways that they learn, in the ways that they know are accepted and promoted and honored in our school systems.
What I try to do is to inspire people that if it's not you, then who is it going to be that's going to take that seat? And when you go to these classes and you're the only person of color, it's difficult, but it's not impossible. And many of us have had to occupy those seats. And the more that we occupy those seats, the less that we are isolated. And the more vocal we are and more courageous we are in those spaces, the more we can change the landscape of classrooms and so forth. And I was inspired by something recently about saying yes to things, trying something new, taking a class, going back to school, becoming an administrator, and trying something new, and not leaving with regret, right? So if you don't do something, you may regret that you never did it, right? Because you're fearing that you're gonna fail, right? But if you don't ever try it, you're left with regret, right? Regret that I never tried it because I'm afraid of failing. So what's worse than failure is the regret that you look back that you've never tried to go to school. So it was really profound for me to think about trying something new in that way. And I encourage anybody who's considering going to school, taking a risk to do something that you haven't done before, don't not do it because you never want to look back and say, I regret that I never took that opportunity.
I acknowledge that I think it's harder for us to tap out than for white educators. And I have seen us, break our own boundaries so many times, and I've seen educators of color advocate for and fight for students of color until we get literally pushed out of our jobs and our schools and our districts. So I am still learning how to tap out. I'm not gonna lie, I've been teaching 8 years and it's still really hard for me to draw that boundary. But But yeah, I mean, you know, at the end of the day, I don't have my own kids, so it's very easy for me to be like, this is the way I'm contributing. But like, I just want to acknowledge that it is much harder for us to do that than for anybody else, and it is a learning process for me, and I'm struggling with it still.
Went to school, middle school in Gresham Barlow School District. So I didn't have sort of the cognitive tools to bridge that gap. I went to school mostly like white spaces, and then when I would come home, you know, my family, we were so close-knit, and so like Mexico to me was in my household, you know? And so it was actually very confusing to me because at school I was taught an ethic of like being very individualistic, you know, pushing myself through, and like everything was about like me and what I could do for myself essentially. And then when I got home, that expectation was very different. You know, it was like you do things for the family and you do things for, you know, like the people that came before you. And that just wasn't what I was taught in school. So I grew up to try to be like two very different people actually, and had to like just go back and forth and switch. And that was very exhausting. And it wasn't until I was older that I realized like why I was so confused about who I was. For a while growing up that way. And then I got my first teaching job was at Cesar Chavez K-8 over in North Portland, and that felt like coming home. And it was the experience as a teacher that I got that I didn't get as a student. Ooh, apparently that makes me feel a little emotional. And you know, like I said in the video, like that was the experience that was so healing to me, because I was like, oh, I make sense here. And my students, I make sense to my students.
Me showing up every day is permission, right? Me showing up every day in my authenticity. And let me be clear, I think I want to expound a little bit on what Alejandra mentioned about being in predominantly white spaces and having to code switch and assimilating a bit. And I think I struggled with that for a while. My mom and I have this kind of internal dialogue that she and I have. After I'll do something, I'll get my mama's feedback. And my mom, up until recently, would always be like, that was kind of, I don't know if I heard Nikki. I think I kind of heard somebody else. And what she was referring to was that customer service white voice, right? That code switch that we get when we're in professional public spaces. And I was so perfect at that voice. I was so pristine and precise about how to show up polished. And I would look for my mother's affirmation and I wouldn't get it from her. It didn't matter how many people were clapping or what things it was my mom who I really wanted to affirm that I had done something that she was proud of. And I remember I had done something, I don't even remember what it was that I did. All I remember was the day that I got her affirmation. It was the day that I said something in my authentic voice and she was like, that's it. And I got chills, because when your matriarch tells you you've done it, it means now I gotta copy and paste, right? Now I just gotta do that thing. And so I think for me, hearing my mother's voice is always a reminder to not code switch. There is a time and place, but we don't need to do that anymore. And we're making sure that we don't have to do that so that our babies definitely don't have to do that. What I love about that is that unapologetic, my right to exist. I think we saw it a couple of weeks ago when we watched the NCAA Women's Championship, the finals. And for the first time, we were talking about women's basketball. And we saw Angel Reese talking about Ring Me. And there was the cockiness, the arrogance that she had. And I remember there'd be a time where I'd be like, oh, you gotta die that down, sis. It's too much, it's too loud, it's too bold, it's too out front. And then I looked and I said, well, maybe she's standing on our shoulders so that she doesn't have to be apologetic or that she doesn't have to be censored. And so I think a part of what gives my babies permission is that when I do my self-affirmations in the morning and I remind myself that I'm not an imposter, that I absolutely work for this, that we got it out the mud, that we got it out the mud, and that I deserve to sit in these spaces, I think that unapologetic posture reminds me that when people tell me you can't be revolutionary or you can't be loud or you can't be bold or that's too much, I remind myself, then if not me, then who? If not this, then what? If not now, then when?
I think one thing that's important that we should start to think about and start discussing is understanding policy and understanding protocol, understanding how districts operate in the HR system, understanding the differences between what our emotions are and what's actually tangible. I know for me as a black man, I often get emotional when things take place and I feel like they're not fair or we're not getting treated equitably. But that emotion doesn't always lead to change for me. Sometimes it deviates from what I'm actually trying to do. And even though I want to be a hero, I get villainized. And so how do we start to understand policy and protocol to where when we do combat and we do fight, we know how to fight and we have the language and the communication to fight rather than just fighting with our emotions.
When I was about in 4th grade, I was in a suburb of Chicago. My parents were studying, so they were in school in Chicago. We were in a very white suburb, and I had a little Puerto Rican friend who didn't speak any English, and so I spoke English because I was in school here since kindergarten, and I was helping her out, and some teacher just yelled at us and just called us out, and I was the shyest, most introverted kid you could imagine. I was just mortified, and that just stuck with me as this experience of like, you know, there's something bad about who I am, there's something bad about speaking Spanish. And so that was just kind of a formative experience. But then my family moved to LA. Right after my parents finished school, they went to LA. They were serving in inner city LA, and we were, you know, in really just terrible conditions. The LA riots happened in my neighborhood. I don't know if some of you are too young to even know what I'm talking about. But yeah, the LA riots, Rodney King beating riots, were in my neighborhood. And my parents were so active at that time. They were ministers or pastors, and they were so connected to the community, and so they were marching and they were fighting for the rights of people, and that also was very formative for me in terms of this idea of like, okay, so we got all these differences. My parents speak English with an accent, and they will, you know, always have somebody treating them bad wherever they go, but they're also teaching me these things that I also value. And so, you know, there were ways that we bridged that, even though there were definitely challenges around that whole divide and that whole experience.
My parents came as refugees after the Vietnam War, and I grew up in an extremely white suburb in Minnesota. And I would say, even though my parents have never taught me to hide who I am, there are a lot of ways in which they assimilated to suburban Minnesota culture in ways that I didn't understand. So I didn't understand why I didn't speak Vietnamese. There's a lot of things that I realized was different about my household and my culture, but because we never talked about it being a Vietnamese thing or just an immigrant thing, I internalized a lot of stuff as just being weird. Or like, that's my mom thing, not an immigrant thing, or like, that's my family thing, not a Vietnamese thing, which is really hard because, you know, it's hard to have pride in who you are if you're not quite sure where all those pieces come from. So yeah, it wasn't until I was an adult. I internalized a lot of racism. I described myself, I'm gonna be real honest here, I described myself because I was so ashamed of not speaking Vietnamese and so ashamed of never having been there. I described myself as whitewashed. Super gross, right? And like, you get called stuff, you know, banana, yellow on the outside, white on the inside, Twinkie, yellow on the outside, white on the inside. And, you know, you use humor and you internalize that and you kind of reflect it back out. And it was honestly, there was another Vietnamese kid on my dorm floor freshman year of college, and one of his first questions was, do you speak Vietnamese? And that's a very natural question to ask somebody, but like, if you don't speak it, it's a very prickly question because people ask why, they start blaming your parents. You don't want that blame on your parents, you know, they did it for a certain reason. And I said, you know, I'm kind of whitewashed. And he was like, don't say that. Never say it. So another 18-year-old kid, it took a Vietnamese person who spoke Vietnamese to let me know that it was okay, that I didn't speak it, that I was never taught it. And I will always remember that experience. And it was, he like shamed my shame, like shameception. But it worked, you know, like, and I had heard my whole life from both white people and Vietnamese people that I'm not truly Vietnamese, that I'm not truly Asian. It's like, well, then I don't navigate the world as a white person. I don't navigate the world, I'm not treated as a white person. But like, you know, if your parents don't, you know, if they don't understand how like feeling different is affecting you, they don't necessarily know how to teach you that. My parents, they grew up in a, you know, racial majority. They had never been a minority until they moved here. So there's a lot of stuff they weren't able to teach me. they weren't equipped to, they didn't have the background, they didn't have the knowledge about it. And so I'm just really grateful the education I was able to access and the people I was able to eventually surround myself with once I graduated, once I got out of Eden Prairie, Minnesota. Go Eagles. But yeah, it's. I lived for many, many years with a lot of shame, and I didn't even realize where it was coming from or what it was. But a lot of it was because I didn't feel affirmation. I didn't have the space that we're all here trying to create for our students. So yeah, that whole trying to provide what you weren't able to give, and yeah, it's not just facing the world so much as like facing all the hurt and the pain that you've been carrying with you your whole life that you didn't even know where it came from.
I didn't know I wanted to be a teacher. I started off as a camp counselor in college where I was at U of O. And they said, if you want to get 18 upper division credits, you could do this summer abroad. So I signed up because I figured like 18 upper division credits in the summer, give me a jump start, plus get to travel. My buddies got to come with me. He's actually here, Lavert Robertson. And so we went out to Japan, and that's where I really realized that I like working with kids. I was on a military base, like coaching and teaching basketball and football and everything else, but I always was a rapper in college, and so I had a DAT tape. I always carried my DAT, which was like beats. So now you guys can just get on phones or whatever and you have your beats, but for me, I had to have a DAT because this is like back in the 90s. So I had my DAT. I figured out where they was gonna have a freestyle contest at, and it was at Yokohama Bay Hall, like down in Tokyo. So we took the train down there, I signed up, and I ended up winning the freestyle contest. So from that, they said the winner of the freestyle contest gets to open up for Redman. Redman was like gonna be there the next day, so we got free tickets, and all of a sudden, like, I'm like, okay, I was freestyling against like all these Japanese dudes with cornrows, and I had like, but I had the waves though. So the next day, I opened up for Redman. I did like 2 songs. Lavert was on stage, he was throwing water on people and whatever else. And then all of a sudden, it just got dark, and we heard, time for some action. Time for some action. And I looked, and it was like Redman, like rocking right next to me. I was like, ah! So that was like my end of like my rap career though, because after that, I was like, it was fun. That was like the pinnacle of it, but I was just ready to go and get my teaching license, and that's what I did.
I've known Paul for over 20 years, and I can't believe you didn't share that story. I'm so upset with you. But going back to your question, it's really interesting because as children, we're so impressionable, and that's why it's so important that when you say, if you can't see it, you can't be it, or see it, be it. I didn't have any educators here in Portland that looked like me, and so I just was impressionable, and if people wanted to call me George, I was just ready for it. Even though when I got home, and when I talk about my parents, that's when the tears come, because, we didn't get here overnight. I was just talking to Miss Spears when we were down there, just saying, we're up here talking like everything's all good, but we took some bumps and bruises getting here. This wasn't easy, and so if I talk about my name, if I talk about myself, I got to talk about my parents, who were, ultimately ridiculed. And they went through all that for me.
And as Jorge mentioned in talking about his parents, and Summer mentioned in talking about her parents, we are nothing without those shoulders that are holding us up. And so I think for me, becoming a principal, I, like many educators on this stage, I don't think I charted that North Star specifically, right? Those of us who are always in trouble growing up, or always talking too much in class, always have an opinion about something. Nicole means victory of the people. And so what my mother named me was almost as if it was prophecy. So it's kind of her fault. But real, I think that it is, it's incumbent upon us to see ourselves and to be able to recognize the shoulders that we are standing on in order to be where we are. And I know that when we are in this fight of education, it's really hard to look backwards because you're so focused on what is ahead of you, as we should be. But I think it is super important for me to just acknowledge that I would not be where I am and who I am without the village that is in this room tonight, and the village that holds me close.
As I sit back here, I work literally right up the street on 42nd and Fremont. So as I'm sitting here listening to Nicole, listening to Dr. Coakley, it's just crazy. And then all the rest of you beautiful people. I'm just super inspired. My heart is beating out my chest right now because I'm a 27-year-old young black man from Northeast Portland that went into education because that's what God has called me to do. I was playing pro football and doing my things and thought that was what the plan was. But as I'm sitting here and I just listening, you know, not to get spiritual and all religious to y'all, but God means something in my life. But to be sitting here listening to y'all, all I hear the good man upstairs and say, you're supposed to be here because I needed you to hear this. And the reason why I say that is because every day, you know, I walk into that school building and I give 125% because I want to be something for these young kids that they can see and be like, man, Marte did it. I'm 12 days away from getting my BS in psychology. And
yes,
I'll be the first person in my family to graduate college. And I dropped out of school to go pursue my pro career and did all these things. I was just frustrated. And then here I am, years later, getting ready to finish, and I'm gonna start my master's in the summer. And so for me, now those claps ain't for me. Those claps is for God because he's brought me through many, many storms. But I think for me to be sitting here and listening to you guys, and for me to be sitting here around all these beautiful people, is so inspiring, right? And I think just what you guys are bringing, Dr. Coker, you don't even know who I am, but your pop substituted at Beaumont to be the principal. And I remember I was a paraeducator for 3 years in the behavioral room for a year and then 2 years in intensive skills. And I remember he substituted at Beaumont, and he seen something in me because he told me to come to the office. We were chopping it up for about 30 minutes. Meanwhile, I had kids and classes and all types of stuff. So I kind of had to, talk on the back end to my head teacher on what was going on. But that conversation that we had for 30 minutes, he was talking about you and talking about how, his kids are in education, how these things like that. Well, guess what? He spoke that same thing into me, and now here I am, right? Nicole Watson. Hold on, I'm giving out flowers right now, excuse me. But Nicole already know what she mean to me. Me and her did some work a few years back at Park Rose when I spoke. And to see her up there being unapologetically herself is beautiful for me, because the same things you were saying is the same way I feel when I pull up to 42nd and Fremont with the 212s in the back, beating, you know what I'm saying? Whether it's Kirk Franklin or whether it's Gucci Mane or whether it's whatever it is, you feel me? Like that, those are the things that our kids and our community need to see, because we are a representation of them, right? And I think as we all sit here, I want you guys to remember 3 things that I live by and some that I stand on. Number 1, I pray every day that somebody changed my life as well as I changed theirs. Number 2, 1 act of kindness a day. Being kind don't cost you nothing. And number 3 is to make somebody smile. If you do those 3 things every day, I guarantee your day will be fulfilled, because it's bigger than you. It's about being unselfish. It's about the people. And I just want to tell everybody sitting on this panel, I'm extremely grateful. I hope I get to meet you. I know it's a lot going on, but hopefully I get to shake some of you guys' hands. Continue to do the work. You guys are inspiring, motivating me. If I could come visit your school or visit your site, I'll be more than happy and willing, because I'm a student of the game. I'm a student of knowledge, and I want these kids, if we preaching education to them, then we got to be the example as well. And not only just being a student in the classroom, be a student of life. Right? And game, to me, I'm gonna break this down. Game means to me God's attention, motivation, and education. So thank y'all, appreciate y'all.
As a classroom teacher, I think it's really my responsibility to create situations in which students feel comfortable being vulnerable. I grew up, and it was the assignments for stuff like read these 2 books and compare them, or like write an essay on this topic. And you can teach rigorous academic learning targets while making students the expert in the subject material. So like write a short story about a memorable day in your life, all right? I grew up reading, like the Western canon of literature, To Kill a Mockingbird, like Romeo and Juliet, like Greek mythology. I don't teach that stuff. They get enough of that, and I have to do a lot of work to read a lot of like memoirs and young adult novels written by Latino writers, Latinx writers, Hispanic writers, and I put in a lot of work because they deserve that. They deserve a curriculum that reflects them. It is my job to provide that for them. It's not my job to look up what, like the U.S. Department of Education thinks they should learn, because they don't know these kids. They don't know where they live. They don't know what they're dealing with. Yeah, so I mean, like, it's we owe them that. Like, that's part of academic instruction. Like, we need to create situations in which they can apply academic rigor to their own experiences, because we're not training them to write. Writing a comparative essay on 2 books that have nothing to do with their lives, how does that serve them? But being able to share their stories with their coworkers, with their neighbors, with their community members, that is what will serve them going forward. So I need to help prepare them for that now.
Thank you.
I just am so inspired by hearing your words, because you just summarized culturally responsive teaching for folks that don't know. And just showing up and having children see themselves in literature and saying, hey, you have a voice in history. This was just not one perspective, which is usually what I heard and what made me fear who I was, until, I had these individual people around here, these incredible people that helped me see something different. So I really appreciate those words. And when you went back to talking about how we have the kids feel welcome, or have them, it's really just making them feel like they belong, because too many times all of us up here, I think, have felt like we didn't belong in the school system, in the academic world, and we're proving it wrong, because there's so many other students that look a lot like us, they're coming behind us, that we need to make them feel like they do belong, because they do.
So I think, let's see, I've been at Douglas for 10 years, 11 years. I've been all of those things, but I think the point that I'm at now is I like to ask, or do first and ask later. So if it benefits the kids, if it gives them a safe space, if it helps them, I'm just gonna do it. And then I'll ask permission later.
I had a compliment for Miss Atima, my mom.
He had to plug that.
She usually doesn't do stuff like this. She told me that. And I just wanted to compliment her. As a student, can I do to help my community?
One thing Auntie Nikki will say is, go to therapy. No, real talk, how you can really help your community, honestly. There's a saying that I always tell my babies, you gotta go heal so that you don't bleed on people that did not cut you. And so when we think about how do we show up in community, you bring energy. And the energy that you bring into a room, the energy that you bring into a space, we are responsible for that energy. So one, keep showing up, and then do your shadow work so you don't bleed on people that did not cut you, baby.
And just showing the excellence that you have in the faith and the power that you have to even pose a question. And we need to empower all students. But man, just be you and show up every day and do your best. And that's how you can help your community, young man.
So I know you just a little bit, because sometimes your mom and I are at different events and you're there with us hanging out. And what I've learned about you is you are actually really good at connecting with people. You connect with all kinds of people, old people like me, young people. You connect with things like soccer, which is awesome. And you're just a lot of fun. And you already have all of that in you. It's already in you. You're already doing it. So I just want to affirm that and say, just keep doing what you're doing, because you are a gift to your community.
Native Club is very narrow, right? And that definition really only applies to North America. We have way more indigenous people at this school. Why are we using a word that is so limiting or like space specific, right? All of these borders we made up so many years ago. So why can't we call it McDaniel Indigenous Alliance? We said, well, tell us more about that. She said, well, that alliance part, right? That's partnership. That's us being together as indigenous people, and we don't have to limit it to Native North America. Let's open it up, right? And that was a good moment in time, right? Because sometimes I feel like I really want to protect our Native students, but I need to understand that it's a lot bigger than just North America, right? Because these borders impacted people, and because of the line was drawn in the sand, I have something that somebody on the south side of the border doesn't, and it's bullshit, and it's just made up.
So my practice has always been to embrace with a smile in the very beginning. And although I don't speak a second language, my comfort is going to bring you joy. It's going to bring you trust. It's going to bring you ease. And I think starting with the smile is the way that you do that, while advocating for the needs of the family, tapping into the appropriate services, but making sure that you're welcoming families from the heart.
Spoke to me because two things. As a kid, I never saw black educators, black men educators where I was at. I had a father, I had a great father, but I didn't see, when I went to school, I didn't see those. So you guys are doing something that is so prolific that you don't know that matters to black men. In this day and age, they've made us feel a certain way. We're not smart, we're dumb, we gotta wear our pants like this, yeah, I'm unapologetically a black man. I wear Jordans in the pulpit, I do all that. But I gotta make sure that the black men see me for who I really am and where I can be. And so I commend you guys for that. And it's an excellent just place where you at. What I will say is, and I'm not bragging on my wife who is Miss Tay, what I saw her, yeah, wonderful woman. She's wonderful. I always say she's the giant, I'm the crumbs. But I have watched her tirelessly go back and get people. Not just sit in those rooms for herself and say, look at me. I've had to brag for her and say, hey, tell them that you're about to be a superintendent. Tell them no. But I've watched her go get people and say, hey, you need to be here. That's right. No, you need to do this. It's those type of things that happen because we need to do the same thing when it's our time to go back and get there. My father, who was kind of a well-known guy by the late pastor, Dr. W.G. Hardy, he told me one day, thank you, I see you, thank you. He appreciates it too. I was in his office one day and he said, son, and I'll end with this, you're gonna be a great leader and you're gonna be a better leader than me. Now my dad was my superhero. I said, there's no way I could be a better leader than you, man. Everybody love you. Everywhere we go, we in Mexico and they stop and say, Pastor Hardy, Pastor, and I'm saying, there's no way. And he said, you're gonna be a greater leader than me. And I said, Dad, man, those are some really, really big shoes to fill. And he walked in his back office, he put on his overcoat, he put on his hat, and he walked out the door. I said, huh? And then he poked his head back in and said, son, your feet will grow. And I sat there and he walked and drove off. And I sat there and thought about it for a minute. And I said, what does that mean? Now he's been passed for 5 years now. And what I can tell you is that I keep buying new size shoes each and every year because of things I didn't know I was going to do that he paved the way for me to do. He says something prolific. He said, son, I've opened doors for you to walk through. And there's other doors that when you get there, you're gonna walk through them because you're my son. Then there's gonna be some doors that's gonna be locked. And guess what you gotta do? You gotta kick that door down because someone's coming behind you that's going to need you to kick that door down. So for all you educators that are black and brown, kick the doors down. These kids need to walk through the doors. They need to know about black history. They need to know about their heritage. They need to be okay wearing their locks, their braids. They need to be okay wearing their bonnets when their hair ain't done. They need to be okay to do all those things. So I commend you, black educators, and you guys keep doing the work. Your community has you. Nicole, all you guys, just wonderful people. God bless you.
I come from Baltimore City. I'm an outsider. Baltimore City. I've lived here. I came here as an adult with children. And my grandmother lived on Baltimore Street. And my brother and uncles would walk down to Pratt Street, they would get chased home by the white boys. Or they would run into a store and have to call somebody. And so there was always this level of fear, like we had to go get them, go pick them up so they wouldn't be chased home, because Pratt Street was a dividing line of poor white folks and poor black folks. Everybody was poor, but they found something to fight about. And where I am is like, I'm not scared of y'all. We're not scared of y'all. We're not running. We're not running. And so that's how I feel, that you grow up in a place where you're running from something. You're running from how you talk. I remember being in first grade and being really conscious about how the white kids talk different than my family and kind of emulating how they talk so that I didn't stand out. And so where I am now is embracing the dialect of my people and bringing that in. And if you hear my accent, that's a wonderful thing. And not changing that and showing up as my authentic self. And that's something I have to get up and be prepared to do every single day that I do this. And I would be lying if I said I'm tough and I'm hard and every conversation I'm ready for a fight, because that's not realistic. But I'm courageous to engage in the battle and have the difficult conversations with folks that don't want to hear it. And that's what I commit to every single day.
I grew up in a house that had a formal living room with the plastic over top of it. And like the mirrored tables, and I wasn't allowed to go in there. Me and my little brother, we couldn't go in there, but we could play in the den. And so the formal living room was off limits. And I think that that's how a lot of parents feel when they look at school systems and districts and schools, and they're looking as outsiders looking in. And I think that to really meet our parents where we are, we need to remove our formal living rooms, and we need to invite them into the den. And whether we speak the same language or not, then we need to have educators who do speak their language, who are there to meet their needs.
Yes.